All right, what's going on, people? This is a little bit of an impromptu podcast because this is the first time the movie nerd is officially outside. I am podcasting live from a Starbucks in Albany, New York, and I am joined once again by the lovely Kristen, aka Miss Filmingo. I mean, you've been on this podcast so many times that you're basically like a permanent staple. We're here to talk about Renfield.
I mean, if I am.
Yeah, exactly. We're here to talk about Renfield, which is a movie that I feel like is gonna be a similar conversation to what we've had before about a couple of other movies that have come out this year, specifically one that I'm thinking of. So, Kristen, you got anything you want to say before we get this started?
I'm a Nick Cage fan, so I'm here and I'm excited to talk about it. So
Yeah,
let's get into it.
Nicolas friggin' Cage. I mean, let say no more. Let's get into it. Going on, people? We are back to our regularly scheduled Sunday morning slots. I'm, of course, Dom the Movie Nerd. I am joined once again by Kristen, aka Miss Filmingo, one half of the M&K podcast productions. I'm still gonna keep screwing up that name, but that's fine. I'll get it. I'll get it eventually. I will get it eventually. I'll be the one person on the internet that actually gets it right. So we are here to talk about a movie that I feel like, once again, like so many other movies that we've talked about this year, is it just, Kristen? I don't know what it is about this year so far, but it's like I feel like every single movie is just being completely misunderstood as far as its intentions, what it's setting out to do, all that. Like you have people saying that Cocaine Bear is problematic, not because it made up its entire story, not because it is ultimately just a genre, a creature feature, but like so you get that. You got superhero movies bombing out left and right. You have the industry really not sure what they want to do. You know, they're slashing budgets. We're in a recession right now. Things are just crazy all around. And so naturally you can imagine that like after the craziness of March where we just had like content dropping back and forth, left and right, just nonstop. You know, you had so many things that happened in March. And now April, it's like, I feel like we're on like a hangover period in April. April's traditionally been a very strange month. In the past, we've gotten like a lot of like really weird releases, sometimes some good ones. Like famously, I think the biggest surprise of last year was that you had Michael Bay's Ambulance, which came out in April of last year, which is just insane. And now, 1 week after the Super Mario Brothers movie is set to be like the biggest movie of the year, 1 week after arguably one of the biggest TV events ever with the death of Logan Roy, I can say that now, you know, because people have actually seen that episode now to this point. You have a movie that is just trying to be a fun little genre feature, and by nature of the star that it has, which is Nicolas Cage, the most memed actor on the internet. We have one of these movies like every month that we talk about, every year for the last couple of years that we've talked about. We talked about, what's it called? Oh, what was that Nick Cage movie that we talked? We talked about Prisoners of the Ghostland back in 2021 after we missed.
There was
after we missed Willy's Wonderland and Peg, and then we talked about The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent last year. And this year, it's Renfield, which is a movie that you would think, again, when I first heard the reports of this, I thought it was going to be like, okay, this is just going to be another joke. They're doing a movie about Renfield, about Dracula, but from Renfield's perspective, and Nicolas Cage is going to play Dracula. I'm like, okay, so this is going to be ridiculous. And then it's weird because, like, despite us living in an age where we get so many misleading trailers that completely deviate from what they're setting out from the movie that they're setting out to do, we get another instance where this movie, you have a movie that is exactly what the trailers delivered on. It is like a gory, campy, ridiculous experience that doesn't take itself too seriously and is trying to venture deep at a deep message, but it's held back by its slightly simplistic script. Like, I don't know, like I wanted your thoughts, like first and foremost, before we dove in, like when you first heard about this movie, what it's about its existing, and just being like, do we really need this?
Yeah. Oh my God, it's just a huge jug. Oh my God. Sorry, I just got distracted.
Stay hydrated, people.
But yeah, I was on board. I love to follow anything Nicolas Cage because, you know, he's the man, he's a legend, he's a meme. Anything he touches, you know, it's either going to be really good or really bad. There's no in between from my Nicolas Cage viewing experiences. So knowing that Chris McKay was a director who I really enjoy his previous projects, and knowing Nicolas Cage joined, and then we have Nicholas Hoult, everybody going on board. And I thought this was a unique take for the film. So I was just on board with everything through. And I thought, you know, it's not told from Dracula's perspective, but taking a unique take on Renfield's perspective. I was really excited about it. And I just went in and I loved the trailers. I loved everything what I saw. It was like a simple story that was going to be like easy enough to follow for like a regular audience member, even though we know the audience is not dumb, but it's a simple story that you can just, I feel like you can enjoy the ride for. So I was just very excited completely all the way through.
Yeah, it's interesting when you see that, like, you know, the amount of like crazy IPs that are like entering the public domain now, where it's like we live in an age of sequels and IP where just everything is trying to be a part of something recognizable, so it'll get somebody out there. And what's cool about that, like the one small bit of good thing that comes from that, amongst all of the crap that we are unfortunately enmeshed with, is that we get a bunch of stuff that is now finally entering the public domain because it's hitting like 100 years of existence. And so you have a lot of creative opportunities for a lot of studios and creators to actually come in and be like, oh, we're actually going to do like a funny take on this. Oh, we're going to do like a ridiculous take on this. Like, I still think probably the best and worst example of this simultaneously is that awful Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey.
I was just going to say that we just got that adaptation of Winnie the Pooh, since it's public domain at this point.
Which I'm like, okay, the fact that this is the stuff that we're getting as a result of Winnie the Pooh being public domain, I'm like, this just shows where we're at as a society right now. But I mean, I've been making no secret of the fact that like one of my favorite subgenres of anything is vampires, and how I feel like Twilight, the fact that we lived through like an entire decade of like Twilight and Vampire Diaries, kind of like, you know, turning vampires into like romance novels. I like that we're finally, whenever we get like vampire movies just in general, we're getting back to a time period where it's like, no, these guys are being treated as what they are, you know, monsters. And
yeah, and it makes me think of the time of when was it Fright Night came out?
Right.
Yeah, because that was also pretty camp, but it was also a movie everybody also really enjoyed, and I think that was a great IP. You know, it's a remake, but
well, the trouble with Fright Night was that it came out like, that was what, 2011, so that was like right in the middle. It
was like ahead of the time, though.
It wasn't ahead of its time for sure, but it was like right in the middle. Like you had like a couple ones that snuck in, like you had 30 Days of Night, stuff like that. But for the most part, like it was just every vampire movie was just like about romance and humans falling in love, and it's like vampires having moral existential crises about being immortal. It's like, shut up. We don't care about any of that. We want to see you rip throats out and have fun and be bloody and disgusting, which is what True Blood tried to do, to all of its credit. And then just you know, it was always like, we got to get back to Sookie and Bill, and it's like, I don't care about Sookie and Bill. They're the two worst characters on the show. But I will give credit where credit is due. Despite Dracula Untold getting a lot of flack, I like that, trying to take it back to like, you know, more of like the old school prestigious areas of vampirism. And like, I will say that even though this movie was pretty terrible, last year's The Invitation like was kind of getting back to like what I wanted to see, for lack of a better word, which is just like, again, just bloody, ridiculous camp. And that's kind of in a strange way what this movie. Yeah, and that's exactly what this movie is doing well, where this is a movie that knows exactly what it is doing. It is not taking itself seriously at all. The camp and the gore is just at an all-time high. Like, they finally, I think with just the gore in general, which is what a lot of people are focusing on as one of the more positive elements, it's just they found a way to actually mix in the digital effects with the practical effects in a way that's not distracting. Because the thing is that, like, you saw this, like, particularly egregious with the Expendables, is they would use digital squibs, and it would just look so fake. Because the thing about it is that, like, squibs are such a fundamental part of previous action movies, and the fact that like they were so like visceral and like such a big part of like, you know, showing the gore and like showing the excess of the violence. And so when you make that digital, something is just going to feel off. And with this one, I don't know if it's just the perfection of the technology, but they finally found a way to actually like use that in a way that like feels shocking. Exactly. And so you got like every time like you have a crazy action sequence that goes off in this movie, and they just blood and guts flying everywhere. Like Renfield's kicking people. Like you have multiple people getting like their heads kicked off, and like there's a scene where like Renfield knees a guy, and it like shows like the blood vomiting.
The part where like even to the point where like Dracula's like ripping limbs off of people, and I was just like, oh my god, I'm so here for this. This is nuts. It's like, you know, a karate movie but extreme.
It's like, it's literally like, it's kind of funny because in a weird way it reminded me of Birds of Prey, because I think, and again, this is a thing that was both a strength and a weakness for both Birds of Prey and this movie Renfield, is that it would be like this goofy comedy, and then when it would switch to the action sequences, it would all of a sudden become like John Wick. Like, it wasn't like a Pineapple Express where it's like, oh, you know, they're doing all this action and it's clearly like on the set and improv and like, you know, it's part of the, no, they were just like, it's like they brought in the second unit directors, and all of a sudden it becomes literally like a John Wick or like a Rain movie, where it's like they're doing all these crazy action sequences, and you're like, wait, what kind of a movie I'm watching? It's weird because like, it's not I don't have a problem with it because the sequences are really well done, but in terms of like it being really jarring for the tone overall, like, I don't know.
Everybody I've seen complain about this movie, and I didn't, you know, tone is important and I get it, but I just kind of wanted a fun movie, which this film is, and I didn't really mind that, but it's almost a romance given the fact what we see with Nicholas Hoult and Awkwafina. Then we have the action stuff, we got the horror comedy, we got the drama that involves Awkwafina's character. It's a lot, and I think that's why people, like the critics, kind of stood away from that and were really on board, because tone is important, like I just said. But I think everything kind of mixed well together, but I think that's what Chris McKay was kind of looking for. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird because like I think the biggest thing is that like I think people were taken off guard by the fact that this kind of had like way more story, for lack of a better word, than people were expecting. Like, in order to break it down, essentially, you have like, it's fun. The movie starts off with like a fun little voiceover and like a backstory of like, they do some like black and white rendering of like the original Dracula,
really well
but swapping it.
done,
It's really well done, but swapping in Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult for the classic parts of, again, Bella Lugosi and whoever the old actor that played Renfield in the original 1930s Dracula, and essentially explains their backstory and relationship and why, like, how Renfield is able to been like rationalize the fact that he is morally compromised for serving Dracula all these years and like all the innocent lives that he has caused. And now you essentially find himself in a situation where he's trying to use the powers that Dracula has given him for good, but they're ultimately just causing more problems, especially since Dracula is becoming more and more bloodthirsty and crazed as the years have gone by.
Right.
And he finds himself kind of embroiled in a mafia subplot that's going on between Awkwafina, who's a cop trying to take down this mafia cartel led by Shohreh Aghdashloo, and her son Ben Schwartz, which is probably the most unbelievable thing in a movie that stars Nicolas Cage as Dracula. Like, that was probably the biggest surprise to me, was seeing that. I'm like, okay, so the movie is pitched on watching Nicolas Cage as Dracula, but half the time I'm just being distracted by Ben Schwartz mugging and doing more dumb improv that doesn't even make sense half the time.
It doesn't make sense, but I feel like some of the times it really steals the scene. It's just really funny and ridiculous.
If this were like a regular comedy, for lack of a better word, like Ben Schwartz would be perfect, and his sense of improv and timing would be perfect. But like, just given the subject matter of it, it's like every time he's on screen, like he stands like a sore thumb. Like Awkwafina, I'll give credit where credit is due. Awkwafina, at the very least, kind of understands the movie that she's in. Like, because her whole movie, she's like, no, I'm in like a serious cop drama, and she's like trying to do her best with like, it's like she's in essentially like an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but if they took it actually seriously and it wasn't like a comedy. And you have Ben Schwartz, who's just like doing his Ben Schwartz thing, because that's just like what his brand has become at this point. Now, especially now that he's like playing an iconic character with Sonic the Hedgehog. And then you have Shohreh Aghdashloo, who's just like, she can never do any wrong, but like she's just like, it's another classic situation of like, wow, taking a nothing part in a really what is essentially a silly comedy like really seriously. And then you have Nicholas Hoult and Nicolas Cage, which is like every time they're on screen, you're like, okay, that's the movie that I'm interested in. That's the movie that I really want to be watching, which is, it's like, in a strange way, like this actually like really interesting take on like, I don't even know what you would call it, like toxic, like
it's toxic workplace relationships. That's the way I saw it as.
I mean, that's like that's what they market it as, but like I feel like it goes a little bit deeper than that. Like, there's definitely a little bit of a like a dominant submissive what's called relationship going in there as well. Like if I would be allowed to probe that deeply. But what fascinates me is it's like, because they're probably the two best actors in the movie, like every time they're on screen, I'm like, wow, I'm actually like kind of invested in this drama. Like the lines that they're saying are inherently silly, and they ultimately are like very simplistic, and they're clearly not trying to be that deep. But I don't know if it's the performances or just the nature of the subject matter that they're going for. But like every time they're talking, I'm like, damn, I kind of do feel bad for Renfield. Like, he legitimately because he's ultimately portrayed as a guy who's just like, yeah, I kind of just wanted this better life for my family.
I felt bad for him. I really did. I think it's the nature of how Nicholas Hoult gave the performance, because I haven't really seen like a comedic timing performance from him in a while. I mean, you see him on The Great, where his comedic timing is really good there, but this is like a film where you can really see his chops kind of shine, and the way that he chooses to do some things with his character. I really felt the simplistic nature of it, because he wants to also help people. That's why, we see in the beginning of the film where he's in the restaurant and he helps Awkwafina in the film. So
yeah, it's kind of interesting, because it's like, I the biggest thing I always complain about with comedies in this tone is that I'm like, I never really feel invested in the arc that the characters are going through. You know, like they because the biggest thing that I noticed with transition from comedies, and this is largely when I noticed that comedies starting to go away and not being as appealing to people as they used to, is that like you have like this whole era of Apatow comedies where Apatow, the magic that he was always able to pull off was that he was always able to make the character struggles feel relatable. It wasn't about the jokes, you know, like what a lot of people, when they look back and they criticize people like Seth Rogen, like Jonah Hill, like James Franco, you know, all those big comedy stars that we got out of that era. The thing that they miss about all those movies is that, like, yes, after a certain point, a lot of those guys ended up in a lot of the really generic and repetitive comedies that just weren't as funny, that we're just trying to emulate that era. But the thing that made that era, that I'm going to say started really in about like 04 and continued about like 2009, 2010, and then it started to fall off. And 2012 was really like the last good period that we had of that, is that all of those character struggles were like relatable. Like anybody could relate to like just two dumb kids trying to get booze for a party, or like a dude that is like never had the self-confidence to actually like be intimate with a woman, or some guy who was like stuck in like in a period of arrested development and then is forced to mature as a result of that. You know, like all of those struggles are ultimately relatable. And even though you have like this heightened ridiculous scenario of it's like Renfield and his relationship with Dracula, like the way that they pose it, and even though it's silly and yeah, the characters are hamming it up a little bit, you still like feel for the fact that it's like, wow, this is a guy that ultimately was just trying to do some good for his life, you know, just a little thing in order to get his family ahead, and then ultimately ended up with the very, very worst of scenarios that he kind of was trapped in, and now was ultimately just trying to
get himself out of it.
Right. Well, not just get himself out of it, but like deal with it in the best way that he can. Because at the beginning, he's like compromised the fact that he's like, yeah, I'm going to be stuck in this scenario for the rest of my life. I've been alive for, I think it's cool also that like, even though they kind of hinted at that he had been alive for a long time, they never really like harped on it. It's like, oh, I am this certain number of years old. You know, it's just kind of like they just let the performance stand for itself, where it's like, yeah, I'm like clearly like over 100 years old, and you can see like how that's settling with me, you know, and like how he clearly adapted the modern time. Like they didn't need to do like a Captain America thing. It's like, oh, how does this smartphone thing work? No, I'm glad they didn't do any of that. They just let the story of the arc speak for itself. And it shows like Nicolas Cage's range as an actor. It's so weird because like, no, sorry, not Nicolas Cage, Nicholas Hoult. Damn, it's really confusing. This is the movie truly of the two Nicholases. But yeah, it's really fascinating, Nicholas Hoult's career just in general, because you're like, this is a guy who was ultimately set to be a superstar after the X-Men prequels that he was in. You know, he had been character actor and, you know, a teen rising star in Britain, you know, with About a Boy, and then being the main star of the first 2 seasons of Skins before he transitioned over to American stuff. And he was set to be like a big star after the X-Men movies, but in a weird way, he kind of pulled a Tom Hardy in the sense of where he decided to go less for superstar parts and more just like really interesting character parts. And that's what's been benefiting him the most, strangely, because after Mad Max, he does, you know, he's appearing in Oscar movies like The Favorite, and damn, now I gotta pull my letterbox in order just to see, because I was literally doing the Nicholas Hoult rankings last night. You know, he's in Mad Max Fury Road, and he's in The Favorite, and then he's in the Taylor Sheridan movie that came out during COVID, Those Who Wish Me Dead, and he's like just doing these character parts, and then he's in The Menu last year, you know. But it's like it's a guy who's like really restricted himself to like interesting character parts, and I think that's what's benefited him, strangely, because like now he's
becoming
not, like,
more of the character actor, which we like what you just said with Tom Hardy, and I feel like that's what we also see to give credit to is Nicolas Cage, because we remember him for the characters and not so much the movies. So I feel like
I feel like that's a 50-50. Well, because again, the difference is that Cage came up in the era when movie stars could still sell movies. So it's like, even though you remember his characters and like the memeability of those moments, like back when a lot of his movies were coming out, it's like, no, yeah, you watch the movie for Cage. Like Face Off was Cage. Like Con Air was Cage. The Rock was
in the early ages of like especially the 90s and you know 80s area, but now it's like, you know, he knows he's a meme.
Now after doing an entire decade of direct-to-DVD movies just for the paychecks, now it's like he's weirdly like turned his career around again, where he's been doing just this. I feel like this really started with Color Out of Space, I would say, is where this started, where you have like just this interesting assortment of just like these really fascinating character parts. I think that's why people like started to get invested back in him in 2021, because it's like he's not just doing direct to DVD schlock. He's doing like something like Willy's Wonderland, which is like a fun take on like a familiar enough premise, and he's doing Pig, which is like a neon like quiet character piece.
Good too.
And and then 2022 he does The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which is like, yeah, he's doing the movie star thing, but like the 21st, the equivalent of like the 21st century movie star thing, where he's looking back and like reflecting on his career and poking fun at himself lot. Like that's kind of like, I feel like why Brad Pitt has been able to still have like an interesting career, and Tom Cruise, even though he's still kind of doing the same thing that he's been doing for the last decade, like it's getting to the point now where it's like almost become a joke in and of itself how seriously he takes it. So it's interesting to see how Nicolas Cage has kind of gotten himself to that part, and it translates well because, like I said, he's contending with Nicholas Hoult, who is a younger actor. And the problem with younger actors is younger actors no longer have the ability to have a movie star-esque career. Like Marvel's kind of destroyed that. So now you have a whole generation of actors that are trying to aim for like these types of parts that it's like the like, put it this way, like we don't have any movie stars left that can sell a movie just based on name alone, because even the ones that do, it's really because they have like a brand attached to their name. It's not just because you're interested in them as an actor. Like nobody watches Kevin Hart movies because they think Kevin Hart's a good actor. Nobody watches The Rock movies because they think that he's a good actor, and so on and so forth. You go because you know that there's going to be a certain something associated with that name, you know? And Nicolas Cage in a weird way is kind of like transitioned that, where he's kind of like the last like leading man who you like go because you're still interested to see what he's going to bring, you know? Where it's like, yeah, he's playing Dracula, he's playing a version of himself, but like you still want to go because it's him, you know? And I can't really think of any other like older actor that can do that, because he's another one that's like, he's going to be 60
Would you argue maybe
years.
Keanu Reeves, even though he hasn't memed himself yet? I guess you can kind of say he memed himself and Always Be My Maybe, but you didn't go to the theaters to see that.
Yeah, Keanu Reeves is another one where, again, it's like it's a brand. It's like you go because he's John Wick, you know, and he's always going to be like it's either John Wick or like nice guy Keanu, which is like what the memes are all about. So it's like there's always going to be like some iteration, like that even bleeds over into John Wick, which was something I was talking about with Luke a couple of weeks ago, which is that like you like. John Wick is like this killer assassin who drops like 700 bodies in the course of like a minute, but like he's ultimately a nice guy who just wants to be left alone. And that kind of translates over to Keanu's like real life essence. So again, that's another thing. It's the brand associated with the actor, you know?
That I can also see with, I guess we can kind of see a progression like that for like Ryan Gosling, because I know he's transformed. Maybe not yet.
Gosling's a weird case. I would say it's more so with Ryan Reynolds, because Ryan Reynolds is just like, again, Ryan Reynolds is no longer like a movie star persona. He is a brand. He is just like Deadpool with like the sarcastic, constant one-liners and the always breaking the fourth wall, and like that is associated with him. Gosling's an interesting one because like Gosling is somebody who I can't say that he's a movie star per se, but like every time he's in something, I'm like, people are going, but it's so strange because it's like I feel like people are always watching the latest Ryan Gosling movie, but like not for him, if that makes sense, you know, like if you look at like the last couple of movies that he's done, right, The Gray Man, right, nobody watched that because of him. I feel like they watched that more because it's Chris Evans, it's the directors of Endgame, and it's a Netflix action movie, you know, or like for example, like The Gray Man and Bullet Train. The biggest difference to me is that like Bullet Train was resting off the power of Brad Pitt and that massive ensemble cast. The Gray Man, nobody was going to The Gray Man to see Ryan Gosling. And like the one that he did before,
it was the all factor. It was all three of the factors, I think.
Right, exactly. It's like, so Gosling's always an interesting one to me because it's like, he both is and is not a movie star. Like he's an incredible actor. I don't think there's like any part that I've been disappointed with him in, but like he's not a movie star that sells movies just based off of his name. Like I would not put Ryan Gosling in the same class as like Brad Pitt or Bradley Cooper or Nicolas Cage or really any one of these like old school movie stars that can like sell a movie based off of like their name and acting ability, you know? But that's an interesting one that you brought up. But like bringing it back to the Nicholas Hoult thing, like it's so weird because like I said, Nicholas Hoult is part of like the younger generation, even though he's like, you know, he's almost 40, you know, he's on the older side. He's still technically in that younger range of like millennial to zillennial actors where it's like, you know, like Chalamet and Holland and Florence Pugh and Jake Elordi and all these guys where it's like, none of those guys are like
Hoult is only 33, so he's getting there. Yeah.
Okay, never mind. He's a little bit younger than I thought. I thought he was more so in his late 30s, but yeah, like
Schwartz is older, so
yeah.
Maybe
like put it this way, Jennifer Lawrence is technically like the first big name star of that whole generation. Like she's the first one that really broke out, like 1990, right in the millennial time, in the millennial bracket. Margot Robbie as well in that, and like I feel like Margot Robbie is like the only big name recognizable star out of that whole group. Like I just listed off.
I think for a long time we thought it was going to be Jennifer Lawrence, you know, taking on, you know, the Hunger Games and Silver Linings Playbook and like really making herself a name because, you know, she won the Oscar and everything. And now it's funny how you say it. It's Margot Robbie now because she's the one, you know, making. However, the movies that she's been in, the last two films that she was in last year were box office bombs. So it's going to be interesting to see.
The reason why I think the reason why I think it's Margot Robbie is because Margot Robbie to me is the only one of all of those actors that has not done a franchise yet. Like, in fairness, like a lot of those actors who I just named, like they're just getting their career started, you know, like Jake Elordi and Zendaya and all those other, like Zendaya's been a Disney actress for a while, but like,
right.
and like she's like a big name star, but it's like you also have like the TikTok influencer stuff and everything, but like all those guys are like just getting their career started. Like Holland's only been Spider-Man for a few years. Chalamet has been acting consistently in a lot of awards prestigious stuff, but like he only had Dune like 2 years ago. Is only really starting to blow up. Florence Pugh really blew up in 2021, even though she was getting started beforehand. But like the thing about Margot Robbie is that Margot Robbie has had like a solid decade now of being a movie star. And to my experience, outside of the Harley Quinn part, she really hasn't done a franchise, because even though Harley Quinn is like this big iconic character, because the weird, crazy segmentation and like constant resetting and reshuffling of all those movies is like kind of caused this dissonance. So now it's like, it's weird. She's the only one that's been cast in like a big famous comic book part, and like people are still able to differentiate her from that, if that makes any sense. So Robbie's an interesting case, and like especially after Babylon, and like how, you know, that's her and Brad Pitt, but I feel like just people, that wasn't enough to spare that movie, and like that movie had a lot of other stuff that was going for it as well. But I'm really interested to see like how many people are going to show up to Barbie for her versus how many people are going to show up just for like that insane marketing campaign, just in general. But
property and everything. But
yeah, but Nicolas Hoult, I guess if we're gonna put a wrap in that conversation, it's that like interesting career so far, really interesting parts. He seems to have like kept in the character actor status that Tom Hardy has been unable to get back to, because the problem with Tom Hardy is that Tom Hardy keeps wanting to get back to character actor status, but like his looks and his stardom just will not allow him to, because it's like he's been in too many big things and he hates being in roles where he's handsome. He loves getting gruff, grimy, down in the dirt. He loves changing his voice. He loves putting on masks, you know, all that stuff. He even said it himself. He only did Venom for his son, and like Venom, they don't even know what the hell they're doing with those movies. But
yeah, it's true.
But as far as like the whole like movie stardom thing, I'm all about this dynamic, this duo. Like I said, Hoult and Cage, they're great together in this movie. They really, really do sell the movie, and like it creates for like some really funny like camp factors. Like there's a lot of great jokes in this movie too. Like at the end when they finally kill Dracula, they like do all these other things, and he does his voiceover where it's like, yeah, you know, there's been so many different ways to kill vampires in the past. Like it can honestly get a little confused. So we pretty much did all.
And you kind of see that in the beginning of the film too,
Yeah.
with the garlic and the whole like vampire assassin that you see in the film, and then it's like, oh, we've seen it all, but you know, he did it how to do it the extreme way.
There's a lot of good setups and payoffs in this movie. Chris McKay, honestly, possibly definitely the more underrated, and possibly we might have a little bit of a Tony Ridley Scott situation going on here, where it's like Adam McKay is much bigger and more mainstream and more well known, but Chris McKay, like his stuff it's really good. It's really funny. Like the Lego Batman is really horrifically underrated, and I think is better than the Lego movie. You know,
I think it's better than the second Lego movie.
Oh yeah, well the second Lego movie is just whatever. It's just really,
it's
really
so tied between generic. Like the jokes for the Lego Batman movie and the Lego movie are just so torn for me, because they're both equally so.
And then his movie that he directed for Amazon as well, the Chris Pratt one, the Tomorrow War. I've like everybody that watched that movie told me that movie was like actually surprisingly good, and it still unfortunately behooves me to have been able to see it yet. But I was actually like really, really impressed by that one. And then yeah, so like I said, the jokes in this movie really work. Like it's corny scenarios. Like I was watching it with my friend last night. We were both baked out of our minds watching it. He was like, it was just like corny lines and corny settings and everything. Where it's like, of course, like you have the typical, you know, Renfield is trying to like advise Dracula away from like killing a bunch of people, because like Renfield is bringing like Dracula all these criminals to feed on. He's like, oh, their blood is gross. You know, I need like more innocent, youthful blood and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, you know, really going based off of, you know, the Dracula draining the lifeblood of innocence and really like illuminating his evil sea, and then like Renfield using Dracula's blood to like bring people back from the dead and all that, and like the respective like, you know, evil people becoming more evil and evil recognizing evil and all that. Like there was a lot to get from this movie, and so that kind of does kill me when you have people that are just like, you know, going and be like, oh, this movie's not that good because it's too funny, and it's like that kind of brings me to like the Cocaine Bear arguments, where it's like, have we just lost the ability to like understand what a movie is and what it's going for? Where
and
it's
just like understand the fun of film, and you know, that's like, I haven't seen Cocaine Bear yet. I know it's available on Peacock. I'm gonna watch it because I really wanted to watch it now at this point. But I feel like a lot of just say critics nowadays forget what fun is and just camp in general.
Yeah.
And they lose that. And this is pure fun and camp. And like what Cocaine Bear, from what I've seen, and I've talked to a lot of people, that's also camp, and it's dumb and it's funny. And I feel like we need to go back to some of those times, because especially in the 80s, there's a lot of campy films.
That's literally all that comedy was in the 80s. You know, your Airplanes, your Naked Guns, your Police Academies, you know, Ghostbusters, I mean, kind of started this wave of like more straight-laced comedy, but like even still, it's like I don't understand what people's disconnect is, where I feel like the biggest thing that me, Dustin, and Don Trip were talking about when we talked about Cocaine Bear was it's like, did people not understand what movie they were going to watch when a movie literally called Cocaine Bear, and with the trailer that was? It's like, it's going to be a gory, gruesome, funny creature feature, and that's exactly what this was too.
Like a No Country for Old Man vibe,
right?
Like, no, this is
like for lack of a better word, like a Scream movie. Like Scream, I feel like is able to get away with it because of like the brand familiarity.
It's familiar
but it's like,
in the property itself.
But like, I feel like so far, because I always focus on like what an overall theme of like movies is in a given year, and I'm always like, so the theme of 2023 is people just like, if it's not part of a wider recognized franchise, people just not knowing how to react, or like if it's not part of like an already associated brand. Like the thing about it is we're going to be reviewing Beau is Afraid next week, which is the first Ari Aster movie since 2019's Midsommar. And like, I can kind of already tell what the reactions to that movie are going to be just based off of people's familiarity with Ari Aster and his brand and his signature of filmmaking. And it's like, I feel like we're in this age now of the internet where we have all this information at our disposal. We can just look up everything beforehand, and like kind of the mystery of movies has been lost, ironically enough, because that's something that the menu was actually commenting on, strangely enough, bringing it back to the Nicolas Hoult connection. It's like, unless we know exactly what it is that we're going for, it's like people are just immediately turned off to it. And I'll admit that
like people have to look at the spoilers beforehand and they decide if I'm going to watch it or not.
Right.
But which like, like what you said, loses the magic of film.
Yeah. And it's like, I'll admit, like, I've been guilty of that before too. You know, like I've read spoilers for like big Marvel movies that's like, okay, I already kind of know what I'm expecting, so I just kind of want to know what happens. Or like if it's like a first time new director and I'm like not a fan of it, you know, I'm like, whatever. You know, I'm probably a little bit too harsh on it. Like, I remember the big theme of 2018 was there were a lot of like first-time filmmakers that were directing a lot of movies, and a lot of those movies I was probably a little bit more harsher on than I should have been, that I've since come around on. But like, I mean, I famously made my thoughts on Ari Aster known that I am not a fan of him as a filmmaker, like at all. I think that like I'm not a fan of his style. Like, I think it's just his filmmaking style and his sense of tension building that covers up for either just pure shock value schlock or just unoriginal stories that have been seen and done much, much better before, you know? And
to be fair, I love Hereditary, but I'm not a fan of Midsommar, but I am excited for Beau is Afraid, so I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm going Beau is Afraid being very skeptical, but hoping to be impressed. And what's it called? And like, yeah, it's just like even with Martin Scorsese, like it's like people, I feel like when The Irishman came out back in 2019, it's like I feel like people were already able to make their claims. It's like when everyone's complaints were about the length, and I'm like, yeah, sure, you could have trimmed it at certain parts, but it's like, guess what? Scorsese is the director that he is because he's been doing this for so long, and because he has earned the ability to make movies as long as he wants, you know? And it's funny because like you already see the things coming out about Killers of the Flower Moon, and they're like, Killers of the Flower Moon is going to be even longer. They're like, that's going to be now almost 4 hours. And like, of course, I saw one really,
like,
really
what
funny.
do you expect? It's Martin. Right. It's Marty. He wants to make the movies long.
It's like people just need to get rid of their preconceived notions, I guess, is kind of the message that I'm starting to realize is what is going to be the repetitive theme going forward. Because it's like, so far of all the movies that I've talked about so far this year, I think the only ones that we have had no preconceived notions for are Kaleidoscope, which is the miniseries that Eli and I covered as the kickoff episode for this year. And
right, I forgot about that series.
And then yeah, everything else has been like part of a larger IP that it's like we already have some familiarity with, you know, or like last weekend when Luke and I talked about Mario and Tetris, where it's like, because those were both just,
or even the Mandalorian right now, like that's like the franchise thing. That's
the biggest thing about Mandalorian is it's like the thing that I've been trying to get across about just this season in general as well, and as with my writing about it for guyatthemovies.com with the weekly recap series, is that the problem that Mandalorian has is that Mandalorian had this one mantra and this one way of people looking at it throughout COVID, and then after all of and then we had all the other additional Star Wars series in between seasons 2 and 3, and so now we've got all the, in addition to just the baggage of Star Wars and its current, and Lucasfilm and its current management under Disney, we also have now the baggage of all of these other Star Wars properties that came out in between seasons 2 and 3, all of like this wide varying range of quality. So it's like people, in addition to just not even really knowing that season 3 was out, because like it just came out in the middle of like this massive TV dump, because like we got Mandalorian back, then Ted Lasso, then Succession, then Yellow Jacket, and then Dave. Last of Us was still going on. We had all these other shows that were going on because it was trying to cram it in so it could make the Emmy deadline. And it's like, we have all the baggage of these other Star Wars shows, and like some things are interconnected and some things aren't, and it's like now people don't even know how to react to it, and it's like I've just been watching it as it is, and I'm like, yeah, I've still been really enjoying this season overall. You know, I think
You
it's
like that Lizzo episode?
well, that was just another thing of where it's like, okay, it's more pointless celebrity cameos just for the sake of having celebrity cameos. Like they're not in it. The problem with that is it's like they're not in it enough to be blatantly offensive to me. Like if they were in it and like a intrinsically crucial part of the episode that ended up bombing, that would be one thing. But it's like they're just cameos that are just there and then they're gone in the next second. Christopher Lloyd, honestly, what they did with him was way more embarrassing to me than anything going on with Liz or Jack Black in that episode. Because it's like, Jesus Christ, it literally looks like they took him out of life support just to get him in that episode. It's like, Jesus, he is old. But yeah, no, but like that's my stance. Like, but for what it is, it's like I'm enjoying it. You know, it's just like it kind of ties into our discussion overall about this movie. So it's like just know what it is going and understand that they have a certain way of portraying the story and go with it and stop trying to implement what it is that you want. That's the biggest thing. That's my biggest problem with critics. That's my biggest problem with how I see reviewing people, just specifically in 2023. It's like people are reviewing what they wanted to see, not what they got. And I'm like, okay, but I'm like, I think that's gonna just do more harm than good because you're not actually offering up any critiques. You're just offering up a series of suggestions to like what you want. I'm like, if that's the case, just go write fan fiction. You know, don't be a critic.
Right. Totally. I totally get that.
Yeah. So overall, I feel like that's everything that we would that I wanted to discuss just about this movie. Like I said, this was always going to be a smaller one, you know, smaller, more fun review. You know, next week is going to be the big one because we've got a lot of stuff dropping. Like I said, we have Beau is Afraid, we have Evil Dead Rise, we have Guy Ritchie's The Covenant with Jake Gyllenhaal, and we have an Apple TV Plus movie, the next Ana de Armas, Chris Evans Apple TV Plus movie, Ghosted, which we'll see how that goes. That's kind of looking to be more so along like vibes of The Gray Man as well, ironically enough. So we'll see if everybody complains about that.
But see that clip? It wasn't that good. It was
not. No, it was not. I feel so bad for Ana de Armas because they are trying every which way with Ana de Armas. You know, they tried with like the the genre spot. Now they're trying to transition her into more of an action star between Ghosted and this new Ballerina, this John Wick spinoff that's coming out, and it's like, man, I just feel bad for her, honestly, because like the problem is she's not even that talented of an actress, at least not from what I've seen, to be able to carry that stuff. You know, and it's like the Oscar nomination for Blonde was completely indicative of it's like, yeah, they're trying way too hard, but they are trying way too hard with her, and I think it's gonna blow up. And what sucks is that like, I think she's actually like pretty insightful, surprisingly enough, despite her career, because like she was like one of the first ones to call out why another one of the reasons why there are no movie stars. It's like, yeah, there's no mystery or aura involved with them. Their lives are put on blast on social media. So everybody kind of is familiar with them as a person. So like the idea of them being a movie star, quote unquote, is just dead. And I'm like, wow, that's really deep and insightful and surprisingly right, you know?
No, I completely get that.
Yeah. So final thoughts and star rating for Renfield.
I just love it. It's camp. I put this in my review. I gave it an 8 out of 10, like a B+. I mean, like that might be high for a lot of things for the film, but I just really enjoyed it. It was like one of the best times I had at the theater. To be honest, what we have gotten this year, this is like definitely one of the best times I enjoyed at the theater.
Yeah, absolutely. For what's been a relatively disappointing movie year so far, and just relatively disappointing in terms of times that I had in the theater. I mean, this is like the third or fourth movie now that I watched online. And it's like this is probably the best one that I had. Like I said, it was just an overall blast. It was fun. It was campy. It knew what it was doing. The plot, like I said, is simplistic, kind of whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like you're not kind of watching it for the plot and the story. You're watching it for the gore in the camp. So for me, at least, it's like, yeah, this is an easy 4 out of 5 stars for sure. What about you? Because I realized you missed the star rating.
Oh, the star rating. Oh, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, it's a blast. It's campy. It's fun. I'm like, it's Nicolas Cage's Dracula. What else do you want? Like that alone should be indicative of what the type of movie that you're getting. But yeah,
or if you really want to see it just for that reason, it's that. It's just that alone.
Exactly. So, like I said, that is it. That is all that we have going on for today. Kristen, thanks once again for coming back on. This is a blast. I know that we only had a short amount of time to get you on, but I'm glad that we were able to make this work. Like I said, this podcast outside, I think it went better than I expected. So who knows? This may not be the last time that you see this happen. So Kristen, once again, thanks for coming on. Like I said, you're always welcome back here on the Talk TV podcast. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs, and let them know if you've got anything special going on?
Okay, you guys can follow me at Miss Filmingo on Instagram, K Filmingo on Twitter. I'm all over the place, so just follow me there. I post articles. I just got to cover the Boston Underground Film Festival for Film Fest Report, which was a lot of fun. Got to see some interesting films, so head on over to filmfestreport.com to see my reviews of all the films I got to see. And also the MK Productions podcast. We are going to be back up and running actually running this week. We're going to be reviewing, finally going to be reviewing Scream. Like we've been a little behind, but we are going to be back up and running. And Dom, you're going to be guest starring, I know, on our Guardians of the Galaxy review.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know I'm going to be on there to talk about everything about possibly my favorite cinematic super team ever. But follow Kristen with all that going on there. And of course, you can follow myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, the official Talking TV podcast across all platforms. Like I said, subscribe
and
to us if you're following
enjoy
us.
Succession and Barry tonight, folks.
Yes,
watch that.
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We got the fourth episode of Succession post Logan Roy's death, and we have the 2-episode premiere of Barry's fourth and final season. TV is really only just getting started for sure. Be sure to follow. Like I said, I've still got TikTok reactions going up of all that, so be sure to follow us on that as well. Subscribe to us if you're listening to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch as well. This episode will be available tomorrow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And as always, people, from myself and Kristen, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.